In the cramped plane climbing to the altitude of the jump, I felt that something was wrong before the rear door even closed. The noise of the engines always brought that mixture of fear and adrenaline, but that day, the weight was different, denser, as if something was being pushed against my chest. My wife was sitting next to me with that calculated smile she wore when she wanted to look affectionate but was holding something away. I was 48 years old, used to working in cold hospital rooms, surrounded by expensive machines and decisions that allowed no error. But I never imagined that the greatest threat of my life would not come from a procedure room, but from inside my own home. She leaned into my ear in a tone that was too light, and said a phrase that made me cold. "If something happens, your company is mine." I tried to pretend to be natural. It tried to act like it was a boring joke, but inside my stomach turned. The clinic I built in Dallas was my pride, something it took me years to build, working sleepless nights, double shifts, investing heavily in imaging equipment that I was the only one allowed to use. She knew that. I knew that was the basis of my professional and financial life. And yet he uttered that phrase as if commenting on the weather. In recent months, I had already been noticing changes in her behavior. Messages deleted too quickly. Meetings with a consultant I had never heard of. Insistence that I delegate my digital signature, saying that this would speed up processes. She thought I wasn't seeing, but I wrote everything down in my mind, observing the pattern that repeated itself, as if it were a shadow slowly approaching. I wasn't naive, I never was, but I also didn't have evidence to confront without seeming paranoid. Still, something inside me had woken up. On the plane, while the instructor explained the emergency procedures for the third time, she asked to check my equipment. This was not common. She has never shown technical interest in jumping. In fact, she was always afraid. I thought it was strange, but I let it. She tried to make it seem careful, worried, but I felt the tension in her hands. The instructor, a veteran with years of flying, noticed first. He looked at her the way only an experienced person looks when he notices something out of place. He didn't say anything at the time, he just watched. And when she finished fiddling with the spare parachute, he asked to check everything again. At that moment, my heart started beating faster, not because of the jump, but because of the way it became rigid. She tried to laugh, tried to look calm, but the laughter that came out was cold, almost locked in. I felt a wave of heat rise up my neck. I knew it. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it. The instructor approached, asked me to stand, and began to open the main system. I noticed that he made slow, calculated movements, like someone who has seen it all. When he released one of the latches, he frowned. He didn't say anything at the time, just looked up at me with an expression too serious for that kind of routine. He continued the check, this time deeper, until he found points that were strangely adjusted. They were tiny details which a layman would not notice, but he did. That's when her attitude changed completely. She turned white, quiet, as if she were holding her air. The instructor closed the equipment, excused himself, and called another member of the team, who came immediately. They talked quietly, looking at me and her. I no longer heard the noise of the engines in the same way. It seemed that everything had been muffled. I had the feeling that my throat was dry, as if I was about to face a conversation that would change everything. When the instructor returned, with another person by his side, he asked her to get off the plane before everyone else. She widened her eyes, tried to argue, but her voice came out trembling. I had never seen that kind of despair in her. It was not fear of heights, nor panic about jumping. It was fear of being discovered. The kind of fear that only appears when the person realizes that they have lost control of the situation. I stood still, taking a deep breath, trying to understand the gravity of it. The instructor told me, in a firm and professional tone, that something in the equipment was dangerously altered. He didn't go into the details there, maybe because of the other passengers, maybe because of the tension, but when he used the word altered, I felt the ground disappear. I knew what that meant. It was as if all the pieces I had been silently fitting into my head finally formed the full picture. She tried to eliminate me, not with poison, not with a gun, not with a car accident. She tried to make it look like a parachute accident, something that could have been explained away as technical failure, bad luck, or human error. But she forgot an essential point. On that plane, there was a professional who knew how to recognize a millimeter manipulation. And at that moment I understood that the phrase she said to me before the jump was no joke. It was a warning. It was intention. As she stepped off the plane escorted by the security team, I stood staring at the open door, feeling the wind blow in my face, and trying to figure out how I had gotten to this point in my life. I always thought I knew the person I slept with every night, that I could trust at least his integrity, even if love had worn out. But there, at that moment, I realized that the woman who divided my days was not someone who just wanted advantages. He was someone who could cross a line that I never imagined seeing within my own marriage. The instructor asked me to sit down again and wait while he checked everyone else's equipment. I couldn't get the scene of her being escorted out of my head. It was like looking at a puzzle that I had been trying to put together for months, and suddenly all the pieces just fell into place. I remembered the conversations that were too fast, the way she tried to know where I kept documents, the insistence on facilitating processes by putting my digital signature in her hands. I even remembered a small argument, days ago, when she suggested that I increase life insurance. Everything seemed so innocent at the time. Now nothing was innocent. When the plane finally landed back, the crew called me to a reserved area. The main instructor was there, along with the security coordinator. They closed the door behind me and asked me to sit down. The feeling was the same as when, years ago, I was called by the director of the hospital to report a serious mistake that a resident had made. It was that mixture of tension, responsibility, and fear of what was about to be said. The instructor took a deep breath and began to explain. He said that when he checked my equipment, he found adjustments made on purpose in points that only someone with technical knowledge would know how to handle. He said that the release straps were partially locked in a way that would prevent the main parachute from fully opening, and that the reserve, although still functional, had its dubbing altered in order to cause a critical delay. He used a phrase that kept hammering in my head. If you jumped like that, the chance of survival was minimal. I felt my hands tremble. I had spent my entire life working with and relying on precision technology. I knew what was a controlled failure and what was sabotage. That was no carelessness. It was no accident. It was intention. The team said they called the local police and that the situation needed to be officially recorded. They asked if I wanted to follow the checking of the cameras in the preparation area. I said yes. I needed to see it with my own eyes. As we walked into the camera room, I realized that even with all the shock, there was an eerily calm part of my side. It was as if an inner voice repeated all the time, "You knew it. Deep down, you always knew." When the recording started to run, I felt my stomach turn. The camera in the staging area clearly showed her fiddling with my equipment when she thought no one was looking. It wasn't a quick touch. It was not a fix. She lifted straps, opened zippers, accessed parts that no one accesses without authorization. And the worst? She looked around all the time, making sure no one noticed. I stopped the video with a shaky hand. That image destroyed me, but it also freed me, because there was the truth that I had been trying to ignore. She didn't just want to hurt me financially. She was willing to go the extra mile, going too far. The security coordinator put his hand on my shoulder and said that, in itself, already constituted a serious crime, and that, if I wanted, the team could follow my testimony at the police station. I thanked him, but said I needed a minute alone. I left the room, walked outside, and stared up at the open sky. It was ironic to think that 4 years I faced risky procedures in the hospital, guiding catheters through narrow arteries, avoiding bleeding, living on the edge. And yet, I have never been so close to dying as on that Saturday. That should be a moment of leisure with my wife. I thought about everything we had experienced in the early years, when there was still affection, on short weekend trips, at the dinners where she seemed to really care. But then came the coldness. The distance came. There came a kind of ambition that didn't match the woman I knew at the beginning. It was as if she had discovered that I was more valuable as an asset than as a husband. When the police arrived, the instructor reported everything with professional clarity. I completed it with the information I had about her behavior in recent months. They collected my equipment, took the recording from the cameras, and asked for my personal data. I knew it wouldn't end there. She would have to answer for that. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid to set limits. She crossed a border that did not allow return. On the way back to my car, my steps felt firmer. It was as if I had woken up from a long days. I took a deep breath again. I felt the gravity of things again, but also a kind of clarity that I hadn't had for a long time. And that's when another penny fell inside me. None of that would have come to light if it weren't for a single detail: the attentive eye of a professional who realized what I wasn't yet ready to see. When I left the jump center that day, I sat inside the car and stood still for a while, without starting the engine. I couldn't move my hands, as if my whole body was trying to comprehend the extent of what had happened. The silence inside the vehicle made me realize how far I had come emotionally. I knew my marriage was frayed. I knew there were lies. I knew something was wrong for the past few months, but I never imagined that I would be sitting there, barely alive, trying to absorb the fact that the woman who shared years with me tried to manipulate my parachute gear. I leaned my head behind the wheel and, for the first time in a long time, felt the real weight of the word betrayal. I thought about what my life would be like if the instructor hadn't noticed anything. It thought about what would happen to the clinic. I thought about my colleagues who depended on my work. I thought about the patients I had been following for years. I thought about the very expensive machines that only I knew how to operate. All of this would have ended in a jump that should have been fun. A leap that, in her view, would be the perfect solution. A tragic accident, a quick investigation, and a widow who would inherit everything. She was counting on it. She planned it. I started the engine and started driving back to Dallas. The road seemed endless, but the truth is that I needed that alone time. I needed to organize ideas. I needed to understand how it started and how I allowed it to get to this point. I remembered times when she insisted on reviewing documents with me, times when she asked about passwords, times when she tried to find out specific details about the operation of the clinic. I always thought it was curiosity, or a desire to participate more in my professional life. Now I saw that it was preparation. It was information gathering. It was strategy. When I got home, the silence bothered me. It was as if the whole house was loaded with everything I had preferred to ignore before. I went to the bedroom and saw that some drawers were rummaged through. It was not the first time that this had happened. I had noticed things out of place before, but I never gave it importance. I thought it was carelessness that she was looking for something and hadn't put it back. Now I understood that she was looking for documents. She was studying the structure of my life to see where she could move. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at nothing for a while. It was hard to accept that someone so close to us could turn our story into a set of cold calculations. The trust I'd built for years was broken there beyond repair. When I heard the noise of the front door opening, my chest locked. I knew it was her coming back, probably called by the police or released after testimony. She entered slowly, as if she were stepping on shards of glass. When our eyes met, I saw panic, but I also saw anger. The anger of those who were discovered before their time. She tried to speak, but I raised my hand to ask for silence. I needed to control what I was going to say. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to lose my temper. I didn't want to give her space to reverse the situation. I just said I knew what she did. She tried to deny it. She said that the instructor was exaggerating, that she touched the equipment because she was nervous, that she didn't know how to handle it. It was then that I mentioned the cameras. She froze. The silence that formed after that felt like a wall between us. She didn't try to explain it anymore. He did not apologize. He showed no regret. She just stood still, breathing fast, as if calculating her next words. And in that moment, I realized a hard truth. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about the consequences for her. I said that the police already had the video, and that it would be better for them top repair to respond. She started crying, but it was an empty cry, without depth, as if she was following a script. I lived with her for years. I knew how to differentiate true crying from acting, and that one was acting. I left the room and went to the living room. I sat on the couch and stared at the wall, trying to understand at what point our marriage stopped being a partnership and became this. I thought about all the times I put work first, all the times I was late, all the mistakes I made in the last few years. I wasn't perfect. I knew that. But nothing justified what she tried to do. Nothing justified turning my life into a calculated risk. She was walking around the house, probably trying to find an emotional outlet to defend herself. But I was tired. I didn't want to talk anymore. I didn't want to understand. I didn't want to justify anything. I just wanted distance. The feeling was clear. I stopped being a victim at that moment. I became an observer. I saw everything with a coldness that I never thought I had. And it was at that time that another important chip dropped. I needed to protect my clinic, my accounts, my documents, my work. Everything I built was vulnerable. I couldn't give her more space. I couldn't allow someone who tried to eliminate me to have power over any part of my life. By nightfall, I had already made my decision. When night fell, I was sitting in the living room with my laptop open. The house was silent, but it wasn't that quiet of tranquility. It was the heavy silence that happens when people already know that there is no return. She was in the room, pacing back and forth, talking on the phone in a low voice, as if she could still control the narrative. I heard a few loose words, but I didn't care anymore. From that moment on, my priority was only one: to protect what was mine. I opened my accounts, reviewed my accesses, changed passwords that I hadn't updated in years. I had left a lot open because I trusted her, and now every detail needed to be reviewed. I knew she had recently tried to access my digital signature. She used excuses like, "I want to help you with the clinic," but now I saw that she was testing how far she could go. I also reviewed the accounting team's permissions, checked the clinic's contracts, and confirmed with my bank manager that any transactions over ascertain amount needed my personal, not electronic, confirmation. It was the first time in a long time that I felt control over something that had been slipping through my hands. She left the room at one point with her eyes swollen, but with that posture of someone who still believed she could defend herself. She asked if we were going to talk. I said no at that moment. I said that I needed to organize myself, that what happened was not something simple. She tried to argue, saying that I was interpreting everything wrong, but when I asked her why she tampered with the equipment without authorization, she was speechless. I saw in her eyes the failure of the plan. She never imagined that someone experienced would notice such precise details. She thought I would jump, the accident would happen, and that's it. She would be the widow, the heiress, the owner of everything. I got up from the couch and said I would sleep in the guest room. She began to despair, not because she loved me, but because she realized that it was going off the script she imagined. I closed the door behind me and was in the dark for a few minutes. It was there that I really felt the weight of the situation. I could have died that day. It could have been declared a tragic accident. My clinic would be in her hands. My colleagues would have lost the only interventional radiologist who cared for certain severe cases. My team would be left without direction. And all this for what? For her to take control of something she didn't build. The next day, I woke up earlier than usual. I went downstairs and made coffee as I always did, but everything seemed different. The kitchen seemed smaller. The walls looked colder. I knew that this house was no longer a home. She got off soon after with a dejected posture, but I didn't let myself go. She asked if I would still go to the police station. I answered yes. She began to cry again, trying to manipulate the situation. But when I said that the cameras had recorded everything, she lost her strength, because there was nowhere to hide. The police station was busy, but the police officer who registered my case already knew about the incident in the center of Salto. The instructor had submitted the full report along with images and technical details. When the police officer called me to talk, he answered all the questions clearly. I didn't increase anything. I didn't invent it. I just presented the truth, and the truth in itself was already devastating. After the statement, the officer asked me if I had a plan on how to proceed with her. He said yes, and it was true. My decision was already made. I just needed to tread carefully. No impulses. No fights. Nothing to give her any opening to invert the narrative. This type of person does not take blame. This type of person turns the tables if you blink. When I returned home, she was sitting in the living room, as if waiting for news. She wanted to know what I had said. I wanted to know if I mentioned her name, but I knew that any word of mine would be used against me, so I just replied that I did what had to be done. She pressed on, but I stood firm. The situation was clear. She had no control over anything else. In the following days, we practically did not speak. I left early for the clinic, came back late, and spent as little time as possible inside that house. I began to align with my attorney every step I needed to take. He was shocked by the story, but it was accurate. He guided me on how to proceed without giving loopholes. I adjusted contracts, formalized decisions, recorded important details about my company and my personal assets. I couldn't take any risks. The atmosphere inside the house became increasingly dense. She tried to talk, tried to reverse the situation, tried to convince me that it was all just a misunderstanding. But I didn't let myself be shaken. I had seen it with my own eyes. I had experienced the risk. I knew how far she was willing to go. One day, she asked if I was really going to get divorced. I answered yes. She began to cry as if she had been abandoned, but I couldn't forget what happened. That was not an emotional betrayal. It was not a couple's argument. It was an attack disguised as an accident. And when someone gets to that point, there is no marriage that can survive. The process was not quick, but it was firm. My lawyer handled everything with caution. She tried to argue, tried to say that I was exaggerating, tried to play the victim. But the images spoke for themselves. The technical report spoke for itself. Her behavior spoke for itself. There was no room for any other interpretation. During the process, I began to reflect on the way I led my marriage. I realized that, for a long time, I ignored signs. I ignored coldness. I ignored small manipulations. I ignored the way she emotionally withdrew as she got too close to my possessions. I was so focused on work that I didn't see the transformation that was happening inside my own home. And paying that price almost cost me my life. When the process was finally over, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Not because of the end of the marriage, but because of the recognition that I shared my life with someone who never really respected me. I left the house, moved to an apartment near the clinic, and started a new routine. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and it was safe. I kept working. I kept taking care of the clinic. I kept being the professional I always was, but with something different inside me. I learned that silence is not a sign of weakness, that observing is more powerful than reacting, that trust needs limits, and that, in the end, justice appears in ways that we don't expect. I realized that when everything happened on that plane, I could have screamed, fought, lost control, but I was silent, and inside me, something screamed. It was there that I stopped being a victim. It was there that I became an observer. They had greed, I had the facts, they wanted to hurry. I had time. Today, looking back at everything that happened, I understood a truth that I take with me. Sometimes the best response is not a confrontation. The best answer is to let the truth do the work on its own. My revenge was not to scream. It was surviving. And surviving is what brought down everything she tried to build at my expense. If it were you in my place, you would have jumped trusting, or would he have let them talk to themselves?